I'm going to start by reading from a sequence called The Soul is a Triangular Number. Before I start, I just want to say that these poems that I'm going to read, they're funny. And I mention that because there may not be evidence of that going forward. A poet and a scholar decide to take a dip in the English Channel. They are strong swimmers. It's nothing for them to go hours twined leg and arm, sharing a single stroke. At times, one will push on ahead, inviting the other to give chase, but even then they always keep within earshot, exchanging insults and encouragement. Halfway to shore, the cramps start, the current less a playful tug at the corners than a head-on thrust and drag, and it occurs to them now that it means for them to go under. Luckily, all this is at a certain distance, so that each sees the other swimming calmly on, up ahead or back behind, each continuing to call out whatever they can think of to block the panic. Freedom, and I love you, and look, the moon. Meanwhile, their limbs fill with sand at the same rate, their throats with salt and phlegm, until they turn, in time, onto their backs, shout to each other at the same moment, write my name on the vault of heaven, remember me to the ages, etc., and drown. A poet and a scholar decide to go for a dip in the English Channel. They are strong swimmers, both possessed of an above-average lung capacity, dexterity in each of the 26 major strokes, as well as in a number of specialized substrokes, both able to tread water indefinitely. So why is it that from time to time the poet seems to forget how to swim, and stopping dead in the water, hugs his knees to his chest, closes his eyes, drops his head, and sinks? At these times the scholar pauses too, watching his entry point for ripples of movement, and, after a certain period, seeing nothing, not even bubbles, swims on. She doesn't get far before he comes up from behind, grabbing at her legs, breaking the surface ahead of her. The scholar observes two things about the poet's behavior. The first relates to his manner of going under, which does not fit with the conventions of drowning as she understands them, viz., the describing of wide, wild arcs with the arms, the sending up of foam messages, and, in particular, the latching on and dragging under of any nearby island of solidity, viz., her. That said conditions are not fulfilled leads her to conclude that these are not instances of drowning or near drowning, but the deliberate demonstration of a waveless, non-interference stroke of which she was not previously aware. Her second observation concerns the period between submersion and emergence, which extends past the point at which she judges loss of consciousness and death would occur even in a person of exceptional breath control. From this, she concludes that something like a relay must be taking place down there, with the one who disappears switching places each time with another who comes up again. A conclusion she decides, however, to keep to herself as they swim on. These next two poems are from, page numbers, a sequence called Letters from the River, which obviously I have to read tonight, reading with Jean. I was kidding, it wasn't required of me. They are about someone named Heraclitus. My thesis is on him. He seems to have been not a big fan of human beings, although he also seemed to have some sympathy with farm animals and fish. There's a story about him just turning his back on civilization, going to live in the mountains and living off weeds. So this sequence plays off that. Letters of the River for Acheron. People do not understand how that which is at variance with itself agrees with itself. There is a harmony in the bending back, as in the case of the bow or the lyre. Heraclitus. Do you know, when you left, I went down and drank the gray dregs where the sand and water mix. There at the edge where the heart unsticks like a drain and the used time leaks away and sloshes in and leaks away. And even then, you came back sometimes when the wind rose off the water towards evening. Or no, only the day moon in the sky and the one who lives in your death and dies in your life, singing down into the tides of thirst, swept out clear to Lethe. I just wanted to say that everything is okay here, that the parts you didn't send arrived safely, and I hope you're safe too, whatever you've decided that means. I finally stopped asking about my letters, and even if it's true, it just gets harder and harder to find a word you trade against silence. Did you know? All this time away, you've been teaching me the language of herons, lichens, driftwood. It's dusk here, then night falls, then dusk again, time neither arrow nor circle, but like a bow bent back to almost breaking. My letters float back along the waves, so illegible, science. 5. Lethe. We must hope for the hopeless, for it is difficult and trackless. Heraclitus. I remember there would be a visitor back then, once in a while. I always knew for days before. The wind would sniff them out and carry the news back to me, trees and river breathing out the herd-smelling ripeness of their bodies. I was never wrong. Sometimes no one turned up, lost maybe, or just passing through, their trace hanging in the air for a week or so and fading. But those who came were expected, without fail. I don't know, is that true? I remember one, I sat all day at the window watching him, should not have felt at the last minute that prickle of surprise. The wind still for days before, the river fat with milky light, no reflections. I watched him paddle on the far banks at the tips of the firs, morning, and cross the river that turned step by step to a stone bridge, afternoon, and when he reached the shore, I said, wait. All day in plain view, on foot. That's what threw me off. And me waiting for a ferry. My carry-on already packed, a knapsack of books behind the door. I grabbed the ones lying open on the table and stuffed those in too. Back down at the shore, he waited, scuffing at the loose earth. Sorry, I said. Sorry, he said. Okay now? We stepped out onto the water, which held like the skin of a drum, and we walked, and it held, and broke. I remember thinking figures, because the one thing kept going through my head was that it had happened before, like the recurring dream where you remember too late that you've dreamed it all, seen the ice crack and seal behind you, a clean white ceiling. Felt the weight of your body like the weight of another, drawing you down towards the riverbed. I didn't see, heard, didn't hear, felt that he walked on at the surface, each receding footfall thrumming down through the water as I sank. Down here, no good days, no bad days, but degrees of clarity. Days when there's only the river's silt and murk stirred into fog around me. Days when I can see clear through sunshot water to the sky, a gull, a sail, a water spider. And each time I try to say what I see, my mouth fills with water. And then the last thing I'm going to read is a sequence of poems called Lema. Definition, a remnant remains. In music, the part left over in the succession of chords played in Pythagorean or just tuning, resulting in the wolf interval, so called because its dissonances evoked the ancients, the shivering, redoubling sound of a howling wolf pack. Root. Lepo, to leave, leave behind, to lag, be less than, to lack. 1. On the night you are breathed out, the moon rises dark into dark, its last hair's breadth of light, like a needle of frost, held in the breathing of night. Gone, leaving no word, no cry, only the catch at the back of the throat where the breath stops, like the last edge of a lost name, and the soundless mouth opening empty onto emptiness. And the long wind shearing across the frozen lake, its pulse and quaver in the rushes, the thin, faraway sound of a heart tearing and tearing itself through the eye of a needle. 2. One note left, like the moon in its last skin, a night's breadth from nothing. It hovers on the outer rim, between dying sound and eternal hum of troubled silence. It says, you will be wrong. All that you sang, the notes that seem to rise in one bright surge, to chime and come clear, will go on ringing and jangling in your ears. The words, whose calling followed the contours of the world, one seamless fabric of seen and said, stuck in a lump in the throat. And all that you thought you sang true, your grief and love, your tenderness and terror and joy, will go on and on into the sea-racked wastes of a far sky and turn into the single note of hunger wrung from the throats of gulls whose harsh, repeating cries are drawn out, drowned, and return to them on the wind. 3. Now that the last string has broken on the heart's lyre, and only an unquiet silence shudders still in the hollows, what will you sing? Now all the words cried out in darkness are no more than a sleeper's severed cry, the almost soundless round dark of the mouth open on a sliver of breath, shearing between straining chords. What names remain to call you back to yourself? Now silence is rent by wind's cries through every inward hollow. How will your own small voice from the thousand strained and shredded choirs rise into no one's howl?